The biggest thing is just when you go into the mountains, the more skill set you have to do the peak that you want to do, and the more you build to that, both fitness and skill set wise, can really set you up for success, and not just success in like a safety realm, but also success in a fun realm.
I'm excited to meet you, Karsten. We've only spoken on the phone. It's good to see your face.
Yeah, you too.
You look like a rugged mountain man. So that's good news. All right, man. So I'm excited to chat with you. Ready to get rolling. My goal today is to provide listeners with the confidence to get into mountaineering. But before I have you introduce yourself, let's define mountaineering. And then we're going to segue into the history of hiking as a recreational activity and its relationship to mountaineering. That was something we talked about a few days ago, and I think the listeners would enjoy kind of that relationship and understanding. So I'll let you roll.
Awesome. Yeah. Mountaineering, I guess my personal definition of mountaineering is anybody who's going into the mountains to do some sort of activity. And, mountaineering could be anything from, hiking to pursuing some of the high alpine peaks of some of the greater ranges of the world. Mountaineering kind of has a pretty wide definition. And I think that's one of the cool parts about the barrier to entry is it's not very high, because you can be a mountaineer or alpinist kind of at whatever level you want to do it at.
All right. So we're going to get into some nomenclature later about mountaineering versus alpine climbing versus rock climbing. I think the listeners would appreciate that. But let's talk about the history of hiking, how it relates to mountaineering. And I think what listeners will find kind of counterintuitive, that mountaineering kind of preceded the whole idea of recreational hiking. But I'll let you kind of talk about that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, pursuit of mountains, just going back in time, I mean, people didn't used to have all the recreational time available. And so it was a very purposeful journey. And usually mountaineering was people trying to get over passes so that they could trade goods or, move livestock, things like that. So that's what kind of started mountaineering. So as that became more, where we had more time in society to do things, and of course people wanted to start exploring and conquering, per se, land and stuff like that, that's where the want to go to these high places and see things and stuff like that. And then of course the recreational aspect of that is like, so we started going to these high peaks, and of course people would put their flags or name or whatever on these peaks. But then we realized that it's kind of fun, right? And it's not just about exploring if we've already been there. And so then people started being like, oh, well, I'm going to try a harder route up a specific mountain, in which case, guiding was born a bit out of actually just getting people and their livestock through their goods up over mountain passes and things like that. But then, guides started to be the ones that were really going to these bigger places and taking folks that wanted to go there, go to the top. And then, of course, they wanted to recreate on their own. They would see harder routes on the sides. They would go do that. And that was kind of the first start of it. Well, now, if you take it even further, into the later centuries, people wanted to train more. And so there's these high peaks and stuff. And of course, the weather's not always great up there. So then they would start to come down into the valleys and do things more like rock climbing, or, what we call traditional climbing, where you're placing gear in the rock and stuff like that, and, practicing per se on, rock climbing stuff. And then of course the rock climbing devolved, or maybe evolved even further into sport climbing, where we wanted to climb harder and harder. So now we're putting bolts and stuff in the wall and making it a very recreational pursuit, down to even bouldering, where folks were doing really hard moves, really low to the ground on boulders that they could train for sport climbing. That would sport climbing be training for traditional climbing, that would be training for alpinism or, mountaineering. And so it really is reversed in the way that we think about it today, because I think probably most people that get into alpinism or mountaineering are probably starting actually in a rock climbing gym. And rock climbing gyms are really, I think, some of the oldest rock climbing gyms are only like, 30 or 40 years old. They're not very old at all. And that's, just to show how much the idea of folks wanting to get out in the mountains and their training, in their cities and stuff where they're at, and, doing all the things to get ready to have big mountain pursuits.
Okay. All right. That's cool. That's interesting. So anyway, we're going to make that intro now. So we're lucky to have Karsten to lap. Is that how I pronounce it?
Yeah.
Is that good? Okay. So Karsten holds a special certification and a skill set that only about 200 people have in the United States. So I want you to kind of share with the listeners what that is, and then, share anything to kind of build trust and encourage listeners to reach out to you for mountaineering, skill training, and guiding services. We'll kind of go there. And then I really want to get into fitness, but let's do that intro.
Yeah, I'm Karsten Lapp. I'm an IFMGA mountain guide. I'm also a professional athlete, which really in mountain sports just means you have sponsors and travel and do things. But yeah, with the guiding side of things, in the US, there's less than 200 licensed IFMGA mountain guides. And I'm one of those. I live in the Southeast. I'm the only one that lives in the Southeast. Probably, we don't have a ton of skiing and glaciers here, and that's some of the required skill set for becoming a mountain guide. But, throughout the world, there's less than 7,000, 6,000 to 7,000 mountain guides throughout the world. And the requirements in some places in the world, especially the Alps, are quite high. You must be a licensed mountain guide to take people to the mountains. Where in the US, there's very few regulations on what you need to be taking folks in the mountains. So you may not have any training. I think, most folks probably have some, but yeah. So to be an IFMGA mountain guide, you have to go through the American Mountain Guides Association program, and there's 3 different disciplines there, which one is rock climbing, the other is alpine climbing, and the third is skiing or ski mountaineering. And all 3 of those disciplines are quite long and tedious. Even though the coursework seems short, it's taken over a period of years, usually because the intensity of the work in between the courses is actually, the experience you have to gain between your courses is where you get most of your training. And so it can take folks anywhere from 4 years to quite a long time, 15 years for some folks. And, for me living in the Southeast and not growing up as a skier, it took me about 12 years to do the whole program. A lifetime of work there kind of to get through that, which was an awesome learning process. And one of the things I probably enjoy most about the mountains is always learning.
That's cool. That actually takes me back to my music days.
Nice.
This is a quick segue, but when I graduated from University of Alabama with my athletic training degree, I just had this desire to play music. And so I got into a music school. I did that for a year and a half, best year and a half of my life, just being immersed in it and learning. Just the amount of learning I did was fantastic. So I can kind of relate in that instance. All right, well, this is good. Let's kind of segue into talking about when hiking becomes mountaineering. So specifically, how are the physical requirements different?
Yeah, so, I think in many ways they're not, but in many ways they are different. So, hiking, I think, becomes mountaineering when you start to go up more, but really, I think people like to think of it as the rope. You start breaking out a rope. That's the difference between hiking and mountaineering. And, of course, I'm sure everybody's seen all the free solo stuff and all that. When you break out the rope is, of course, based on your own comfort, risk management, skill set, that sort of thing. But for most folks, we can use what's called the Yosemite decimal system. And starts out, class 1 is just general hiking. Class 2 is like steep hiking that, maybe you're going to take a pack off to do some movement. Class 3 is there's fall consequence. So generally, if you fall, you're going to get hurt pretty bad. And so a lot of folks start to break out a rope in class 3 terrain. Class 4 is definite fall potential with definite injury, and lots of exposure. And then class 5 is where your hands are meeting your feet and technical climbing movement is required. So 5th class terrain is, what we kind of consider rock climbing. And so I think the Yosemite decimal system that we use here in the US can help kind of define where maybe, mountaineering and just hiking start to be delineated. But as you can tell, it's still even gray there, and it's gray based on the person, and whatever. And so the fitness level between those is hiking. I mean, we all walk and we all do things like that, but you start getting into, loose rock, a little bit of exposure where you don't want to fall. And of course, there's a lot of stability that comes in, especially if you're carrying a pack and doing an overnight thing. And so the fitness for mountaineering, I would say, is definitely a next level from hiking because there's also risk involved. And so being in shape in the mountains is one of those things that you can really prepare yourself to do, and that can really set yourself up for success, even though success that you may never know because you didn't slip because, you had the fitness to move through the terrain, or the slip didn't become a fall because you were able to catch yourself with your ability. And
okay. All right. Makes sense. Now, for clarification, are snow and glaciers required for it to be considered mountaineering? And therefore, if you climb 14ers in Colorado in the month of June, where there's little to no snow, is it mountaineering?
It's 100% mountaineering. And the delineation between mountaineering and alpine climbing, that's kind of where alpine technically is above tree line. So that's how you can kind of define alpine climbing. But I think, in the climbing world, we think of mountaineering as more hiking. That doesn't mean you're not on a rope. So I would say, like, if I'm going mountaineering, if I told somebody that, I would be probably doing more hiking on a glacier, but realize that's still walking in snow, and that snow can be unstable or, kind of awkward to walk on, probably carrying a heavy pack. And then, of course, there's probably, if you're on a glacier, you probably want to have a rope on, in which case, there is a chance to fall in a crevasse. There's some technical skills you might want to know there. And then, of course, again, back to being in shape, if you're on a glacier, you're probably not necessarily, but maybe at some altitude where having some physical fitness is going to help you perform better, think better, those sorts of things. So,
okay. All right. So let's actually talk about getting into shape for mountaineering. So I'm going to explain the 5 pillars of hiking fitness. I call them the Fit for Trips Big 5, and I weave these principles into every client's program. Then I'm going to have you comment on them and add anything additionally that you suggest clients add before their first trip with you or doing mountaineering. But there's a caveat here, okay?
Yep.
Let's talk to people that live in flat areas, urban areas, and those that can't hike frequently or at all due to traditional work schedule.
Totally.
I hear from young hikers that have always lived in an area where there are conveniently accessible hikes. They encourage people that want to get in shape for hiking and mountaineering to just go out and hike often with a heavy pack. And it's well-intentioned, but it's actually discouraging to the majority of people that have like iconic hikes and climbs on their bucket list. So let's kind of keep it in that realm,
Yeah, I think that's great because I think the working American, even if there's a trail 10 minutes from themselves, that's 10 less minutes that they could work out.
Yeah.
20 minutes commute. So, that's a big day, right? So,
right.
Yeah, putting some extra time and stuff. Yeah, no, I think that's great. Yeah. So, yeah, definitely go ahead, shoot with those.
Okay. All right. So, Fit for Trips Big 5. Number 1, walk inclines. Number 2, walk stairs. Number 3, walk lunges. I'll get into each of those just a little bit. Number 4, walk far. And number 5, HIIT training. So really with walk inclines. So I do that so that clients can lengthen and strengthen their Achilles and calf. These aren't equal, but treadmill, hills, and hiking with hills. So there are your inclines. Okay. I don't want to get into, doing how much treadmill and how much hiking and hills. You don't want to rely exclusively on treadmills. But anyway, let's get into stairs. So stairs, I always have clients imagine the handrail on the stairs, how steep it is. That would be pretty technical, more of a scrambling type experience at that kind of incline. But because of the flat stairs, you get the aggressive climb and you get the descent. Okay, so you get the strength and endurance going up the stairs. You get what's called the eccentric strengthening going down, which a lot of people struggle with when they're coming down from a summit or something like that if they haven't trained it. Then the third one, walk lunges, is really just a catch-all term for strength training, okay? I like to think of most of the time a kind of a hike-centric or mountaineering-centric leg workout is something that more mimics it. So it might be walk lunges, step-ups, and things like that. But of course, there are supplemental exercises, deadlifts, and stuff like that. And of course, calf raises and stuff. So that's walk lunges. Okay, so 4, walk far, which is all relative. I'm going to usually formulate everything based on miles and elevation gain when it comes to training. So walking far is relative. Usually that happens as you get closer to your departure date, but taking tens of thousands of steps is really critical. And then, of course, HIIT training. I recommend that for several reasons, which you don't have to get to at the moment or at all. But I just wanted to bring those up, and I wanted to kind of frame our discussion around those. I'd love for you to share your thoughts on those. And then if there's anything that stands out that someone was going to be going with you for a mountaineering experience, you'd want to be sure that they either emphasized any of those in particular, or maybe there's something that you would add. So I'll kind of let you roll with that.
Yeah, that sounds like an awesome progression. I always think about what am I trying to achieve and what would be like the perfect thing. For the perfect thing would be, well, I can go out my house and train on the mountain that I want to climb. But that's not probably going to happen for 99.9% of the folks, including myself, right? I can't do that. So what do I do to train for big peaks and those sorts of things, and so we start to, the terrain that is around us, that's available to us, that's the terrain that we have to use. And so we're going uphill. And so most peaks are going uphill, you got to go uphill a lot to get there. Yeah. And then the down, you got to go down a lot. And so all of that, and you're probably going to be fatigued doing it is the other thing. And so, yeah, I think off balance stuff would be the biggest thing that I think is hard for folks that work in our squared off world. So the steps are flat, they're flat going up and they're flat going down, where when you're, hiking down a mountain, as you're going up in the morning, it is very like just incline, like the snow is at an incline. There's not steps in it necessarily. We try to kick steps with our crampons and our boots and that sort of thing to flatten those steps out because that's what we're used to and is easier on our body. But, that doesn't translate to the slope being like that. So we're still bending our ankles. Anything off balance that we can do, some off balance training, core training, adding in like that. And the other thing, is any sort of weight or pack training. So even here, I live in the mountains here in Western North Carolina, right inside Pisgah National Forest. And so I go trail running a lot, so that's off balance for me. But even when I'm just doing training for bigger trips and I want to go hike uphill and go on a hike, maybe I'll throw a weight vest on or, a heavier pack. What I like to do with that heavy pack is have water in it. And the reason I like water, one, because I can drink water while I'm going up. But the other thing is when I get to the top, I actually will take quarter to a half of that weight out of my pack because I don't want so much impact on my knees going down. I want some, like just because you're saying, like when you're going down, you definitely need to train the down just like you train the up. Yes, I'll get rid of some of that weight to just help save my bone structure and stuff like that, but still providing some training for the way back down too.
Okay. All right. I also thought you kind of covered a little bit about your own personal training, but give us kind of a general approach to physical training that you would do. And you can talk generally speaking, you don't need to get into too much detail.
Yeah.
Like if you were 12 weeks out or 16 weeks out and I guess that changes over time, volume and intensity over time, but just give us a general idea. And before you answer that, you mentioned trail running. Just for people listening who aren't comfortable with trail running, and I'm sure Karsten would agree, if you don't already trail run, you don't have to. But if you do trail run and you enjoy it, it's fun.
Yeah, I think running's great. Not everybody's body is one conditioned to just start running or do running or, just hiking in general provides body structure, full body structure. One of the biggest things is just being on our feet. You could think about that as like if you're at a desk all day, a standing desk is great. Like you would be amazed at how much more tired you are standing all day than being in a seat. Structural stuff like that is really good. So if all you have is, maybe a bike or something elliptical you can do, maybe at work, you just stand around all day. And that's again where maybe a weight vest or a backpack just hanging out. Backpack's nice because it pulls you back a little bit. The weight's behind you, not all over your body. Just hanging out with that on a couple hours a day, I think could be a great thing other than just running. Because, running we found is really good. It just seems to provide some of the fastest, easiest shape. The problem with running and, most of my training, I try to keep it zone 1, a little bit lower, effort because I can just repeat that day after day. And especially for myself, I'm doing it day after day, whether I'm guiding or out climbing or, skiing or, things like that. And so, yeah, a lot of those longer, easier runs is really what I prefer, or longer, easier activities, whatever you want to call those. And then, yeah, the high intensity training, definitely it's a key, but that's really for me, if I have to skip something, I'm skipping a lot of that in stuff. But that's also like this last week, I was guiding and rock climbing a lot in sunny weather. The week before, I was ice climbing up in New Hampshire. And next week, I'm actually going out to Colorado to work with some military folks out there. And that's going to be on skis. And so those are 3 different styles of shape that I need to be in. But I think that's kind of general for mountain shape. Mountain shape is this very generalized thing that we have to, in good physical shape. It's not as specific to one thing. And so that's why the structural hiking, walking, stuff like that is with weight on our back is really important. Because if I can get to the climb, like let's say I'm going rock climbing and I've got a 5-mile approach. Well, my rock climbing pack probably weighs 30, 35 pounds. So if I get to the climb and my legs are already tired, well, that's not going to help, right? Even though now I'm going to be using my arms and my core in a different way, I'm still going to be so tired that I may not be able to get up the route. So just having, if I do anything, I just like to be on my legs, whatever that is, on my legs, moving, and I have to train a lot in cities. I actually do some rope access work. So I'll be in cities for that. And my training is on a treadmill. Sometimes because I have some like internet work to do or something, I just set the computer in front of me and start walking. I'm typing and walking. And if all I've got is to run, I maybe jog a little bit there. Again, usually not high intensity stuff. And then if I have the ability, sometimes I'll throw I carry these big duffels. I'll throw a duffel on my back and do some laps on the stairs in those hotels. So it is feasible to do these things in cities and in hotels and in, with travel and stuff like that. But if I was going to do anything, it's that longer endurance style stuff. It's fairly low heart rate that's just moving.
Yeah. All right. I like how you emphasized wearing pack weight and being on your feet. Okay. And then encouraging, for many people listening, probably have a desk job and literally to stand up with a pack on your back, depending on the intensity of the trip that you're going on. I think that's a huge win right there. Just that alone makes a big difference. Sitting is a really big issue, especially when you think about percentage of time. So you can sit all day, go out for a vigorous workout that might be an hour, even 2, let's just say. Typically, people's workouts are an hour under during the week. And then on the weekend, it can be longer, again, just with the typical work schedule. But the idea of sitting so long and the working out sometimes isn't enough to overcome some of the negative issues from sitting all day, developing some kind of chronic tightness.
Totally.
In hip flexors and weakness in glutes and things like that. So I love it. Great idea. What is happening now is, in addition to your workout, you're adding a percentage of time on your feet. That's a good takeaway. I do want to go back to something you said about zone 1. So for a while, I don't see it as much, but there was a good 6 months to a year where a lot of fitness podcasters, and I mean not necessarily fitness, some of the more professional trainers, strength coaches, talking about zone 2 training. So let's go back to what you said about zone 1.
Yeah.
And how that relates to zone 2, or maybe you meant to say zone 2, or...
Give me just a second here. We just had a rescue go out. I just need to text somebody and...
Yeah.
I'm on like 4 different rescue teams, so it's...
So the life of an expert mountain climber. Okay.
Yeah, so reiterate that. So back to the podcasters were coming out. Yeah.
Zone 2 was the thing, okay? Was the thing.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's not important, but everybody was talking about for 6 months to a year. It still comes up in articles, but not as much as it used to. You mentioned zone 1, okay? That you train a lot in zone 1. So my question is, did you mean to say zone 2? Or is zone 1 what you meant to say? And tell me what your reference point is for zone 1.
I think of zone 1 as where my effort is minimal to nothing. When I get done, I could completely go in and repeat the activity. And I say that because I think of guiding as being zone 1. Zone 2 is more, for me, I'm putting out effort. Zone 3 is like getting to anabolic rate. That's where I'm not breaking it, but I guess that's where I'm at. And yeah, so for me, zone 1 is like, I'll get done working a whole day of guiding in zone 1, and then I go out for a run, and it's almost a recovery run. It's really just building mileage on my legs, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And let's kind of put it in perspective. Do you wear a chest monitor at times, or have you?
Yeah.
Okay. And tell me what you use.
I use the Garmin.
You do. And Garmin is like 5 zones. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think it's like no zone, and then there's 5 zones.
Okay, got it.
Technically, I guess there would be 6, I think.
Okay. So that gives some perspective. So I've used Polar. There's 5 zones for that. And I'm using Morpheus now, which is like 3 zones. That gives the listener perspective there. Now, here's an interesting question. When you're mountaineering and you're guiding, you're saying you're in zone 1. Now, let's say you get a client who comes in really good shape, enough to enjoy the trip.
Yep.
My guess is that client's probably not going to be in zone 1. They might be closer to zone 2, maybe zone 3 at times. Just kind of talk me through that, because you have a base unlike a person who does this once a year.
Totally. Yeah. So one of our big things in guiding is to keep the client in what I would call zone 3 or below, so below their anabolic rate. I do think that there's probably more room for someone to train in more zone 2, zone 3, because I think that could, just to be used to being in those zones and what their body's going to physiologically do food-wise and energy-wise and stuff like that. They need to be used to being in that, because I'm probably going to be in zone 1. And I'm not in zone 1 because I'm necessarily in more shape, because they could be in great shape. I've had like triathletes come climb big mountains, and they're working harder because the skill set that they're doing is different to them. And, I just think about it like anything you get in and you do that's new, there's all this input, whether that's physical input or mental input, that is energy that your body's doing, and it's taking energy to go to those sorts of things. And so you're just working harder. And so, I mean, it's one of the reasons it's important for our guests to a lot of times be stronger than us, because that way, mentally, I'm not stressed. Physically, I'm not stressed. And so it's much easier for me to then jump into those zones if I need to. And there's guides out there that are definitely not professional athletes and not pushing it in the mountains that are amazing guides. They don't get done with work and go run 10 miles or anything like that, because they're guiding every day, but they're in good enough shape, especially technical shape, that they can really perform in the mountains. And so I think it is important to understand that, yes, we are working in a lesser zone because we're doing it all the time. And so that walking uphill when we're in crampons and boots, it's going to be easier for us because the technique is, we've spent 20 years doing it.
Got it. Okay. Makes sense. So you've guided hundreds of clients, would you say?
Thousands. Yeah.
Thousands of clients. Even better. Okay. You've observed clients, I'm sure, that were not physically up to the challenge. Maybe they said they were going to train and they did it. What signs and symptoms and failings do deconditioned climbers experience during a mountaineering experience?
It's really easy, because as we start to go up, we start to see a level of shape. When your heart rate gets up, you just can't think as well. I mean, there's so many studies on this, right? And so if you can't think as well, you can't balance as well. That's thinking too, right? Like your brain's processing. And so if you're not balancing as well, you could trip, you could fall, the effort it starts to become obvious. And then of course, speed is safety in the mountains. Sometimes we have to move through zones that have some sort of danger, whether it's like serac fall, like a big sheet of ice coming off and falling into our path or something like that, which is expounded by the time of day we go through that particular terrain. So let's say if we're climbing in the morning, maybe we're on the north side, it's nice and sunny, but as the sun gets higher in the sky and the temperature's warm, that ice sheet is more likely to fall off. So we start super early, which is generally what happens when you go for summit day and stuff. But if you're taking too long, have this turnaround time most of the time in the mountains, and we need to get back down. That's due to weather, due to heat, things like that. And so if we're not making these time frames, then all of a sudden we're going to have to turn around. And that's not I mean, yeah, we just have to do that safety wise. And so the people that come and that maybe just didn't have the time, they had something happen in their life, whatever, they just couldn't put the effort in, but we had this trip on the books and they really tried to do their best, but they just couldn't quite get there. Yeah, we just start to see everything becomes slower and takes longer. And of course, slower and longer sometimes means more weight too. Like if I'm planning on spending 2 days on a mountain and I'm now, man, we might have to do this in 3, that's extra food, maybe carrying extra water, depending. So all of a sudden you're just carrying more weight then. And of course, I like to call it the NASA problem, where it's like we would go farther in the space shuttle, but then we need to put more fuel in it. And every time you put more fuel in the space shuttle, well, you got to put more fuel to take that fuel off, which is more fuel, and that's more weight.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing with climbing. So we try to do these light and fast objectives. And if fast becomes a problem, it becomes less light, in which case it's more heavy, and now it's slower anyway. So yeah, so that's some of the stuff, and then of course, one thing we haven't touched on yet really at all is altitude. Hypoxia is a real thing, and being in shape helps you cope with that. Just your body can just process stuff like that so much easier if you're more in shape, and your heart rates tend to be higher just because you're just in an environment with less oxygen, because you're breathing faster, and breathing takes a lot of energy. That's one of the things where shape really help you, keep your wits about you.
Right. Yeah. And I emphasize to my clients that hiking in higher altitudes, to really take serious those Fit for Trips Big Five, because they require different energy systems, all the way from walking lunges to, walking tens of thousands of steps, different energy systems. And you never know how your body's going to recruit energy. And so, as you said, need to be in great shape, do everything, very well balanced type training. All right. I don't disagree. You may not be able to answer this, but, if the client doesn't come in as good a shape as they should have been, what is it that they usually didn't do enough? You may or may not be able to answer that. I figured I'd ask and see what we can flesh out from there.
Yeah, it's kind of all over the board, but yeah, just that general fitness. I think what you're saying, when people start putting the general fitness in there, it's like, again, if we can't get to the climb, we can't do the climb. And so it's like that, the zone 1 or the hiking, that sort of thing is just, to me, the biggest part of the fitness that can really hold people back from moving well in the mountains. Because if you're tired once you get there, this is probably not going to happen, and so, yeah, just being able to hike with load is like a first step to really success in the mountains.
Okay, that makes sense. So if you had to recommend 2 things, and again, I always preach a diversified approach, but just for fun, let's say a client does 2 things for mountaineering.
Yep.
2 activities. You named one of them, I guess, which is walking with load.
Yep.
Okay. And walking around, even if you don't have the terrain, walking with load. And what would be a second thing? Unless that wouldn't be on the list. I don't want to answer for you.
I mean, I would just say core, anything that helps core, because I just find that, general fitness wise, it just relates to every activity that we do, bending over to pick up some heavy box or running. I mean, we use our core when we run, right? So it's like, especially in off balance situations. So those are the 2 things that, when I have nothing else and I can't do anything, I'm in that hotel room, I'm in that little box, and I can't do anything. It's like a lot of times I'll just do some core exercises. I personally, for me, weightlifting, I'm doing the power cleans, squats, and bench. And I say bench, that's probably more just because it's cool, right? But
Yeah. I get it.
That's what you're supposed to do when you go in there. I don't know.
Right.
For me, the squats and the power cleans, I think just really, I feel like that structurally really helps me out. And I don't have a lot of proof for that. I just feel like that keeps me strong. And I don't do a whole lot of weightlifting outside of that.
Okay, let's flesh that out just a little bit. So
yeah,
for core training, there's floor-based training. There's mountain climbers, there's on your back, crunches, bicycles, and things like that. But I think it's important that the listener understand, you just brought up cleans, and did you say deadlifts? They're squats. So back squats, right? With the barbell?
Yeah. I mean, kind of the Olympic lifts, I guess, is how I would, yeah.
All right. So I think that's important to understand that is very core centric. A lot of people think that's just legs and that's upper body, but that kind of core training carries over significantly. So just to make it clear for the audience, yeah, floor-based stuff like crunches and things, sure. But you really should do, the squats, the deadlifts, things like that where you're holding a load. And some people are uncomfortable with a barbell. They can do kettlebells.
Yeah,
You can even do some things with dumbbells.
definitely. Yeah.
So I'll be interested in how you answer this question. So share the challenges that lower body muscles experience versus core, arms, hands experience in a mountaineering environment. I guess first hiking, but also, a lot of people don't think of arms, hands. I know a lot has to do with using your legs, but just kind of talk about the entire body as it relates to mountaineering.
Yeah, again, I think the emphasis on the core. I grew up on a farm, and so it's one of those, I call it farmer fit. All these guys that are like 80 years old throwing hay bales up in the second story loft, and I'm like, I was a 20-year-old dude that played baseball, and I'm like, they're outworking me, and they're skinny, and I weighed 180 pounds back then because I was lifting heavy and not doing so much core or whatever. And these guys are just like really like these old farmers just killing it. And so I call it like this farmer fit, but
lifting heavy shit.
Yeah, just like in all different movements.
Like bag training. I've created bags for the clients I see in person, just
totally
lifting bags full of, put in rubber mulch for volume, but then you can add like wood pellets for weight. And just carrying bags and tossing them and stuff. Anyway, I'll let you kind of expound on that.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that type of fitness is hard to overlook. And then, of course, just that doing it on a consistent basis. And it's interesting because, I mean, I even look at these like 80-year-old farmers. They're not like, they don't throw hay bales every day, all day long, right? Like, in fact, that's once a year. But just all of the stuff they're doing, maybe they go pick up some heavy tool and then they're having to bend over to work on a truck and then they're walking out to the field and, and all this stuff. And so it was just something interesting that as a kid, especially growing up in sports and training and all this stuff, and just watching these older folks really perform, in a way that like was amazing to me because I'm just trying to keep up. And there's this idea of just like, once you gain fitness and you kind of do this fitness and you continue to do it and make it part of your lifestyle, then all of a sudden it sticks with you.
Okay. So I think for the listener to kind of translate that, one option is they could quit their job and go work on a farm. So that's one. Okay. But
that's one.
That's one option. It is an option.
That's not a good option to make money, by the way, just throwing that out there. So
the second option is just do some of those movements in a gym environment. So anyway, lifting heavy stuff.
Totally.
Barbells, dumbbells, bags, things like that, I guess is the best way to replicate it. So anyway,
100%.
But yeah, I think you make a good point. So in a previous, quickly, arms, hands, anything. I mean, people have they think ropes, they think arm strength, they think hands.
If there's anything that's important, upper body, I would call it finger strength. And the reason that I say that, for the types of mountaineering that are more snow-based, that you're doing more hiking, maybe some of what we'd consider to be the easier routes to the top of the mountains where there's less vertical climbing, this wouldn't necessarily apply. But all the other stuff does that we talked about. But when you start doing technical vertical class 5 climbing, hands are meeting the seat, or feet are meeting the hands, I guess I should say it. And that's when finger strength comes in. And, there's a few really easy ways to kind of start to train that. It's just like hanging, and you don't even have to hang with full body weight. You're just like hanging on a door frame. And I do this in hotels too sometimes because it doesn't have to be a lot. Now, the interesting thing to me that I find is my finger strength gets stronger when I'm working out by picking up plates. Like if I pick up a plate in the gym and I'm going to put that plate on a bar, I try to pick it up with one hand and carry it over one-handed just so I'm using my pinch strength.
Yeah.
Maybe you have to use two hands, whatever, but you're pinched. And so all of a sudden you're like using this strength. And it's just funny that I think about that when I'm doing that, because I'm like, the pinch strength, just that hand strength, the manipulation of the hand. So,
Sure.
So let's relate that back to hiking. You're holding onto a trekking pole, right? And we do know trekking poles work because trekking poles generally take weight off of our legs and like kind of help put it into our upper body structurally. But of course, if you don't have the upper body to deal with that, that's not going to help either. They help greatly with the impact on the way down. And so with these heavy packs, all of a sudden, if we can use our arms a little bit, a lot of times that'll spread that load out over our body. And so, but you also need grip strength to do that. And so making sure we're exercising our hands in a way that they become strong. And that could translate maybe to some like forearm strength. But here's a short little story for you. So I was playing baseball in college, actually, and I was rock climbing more, like starting to rock climb now a fair amount. And I was always a leadoff hitter, so I wouldn't hit the ball very hard. And as I started rock climbing, and I'm just talking in the gym, really, my hand strength got greater, in which case when I would hit the baseball, the energy was transferring to the bat more, and the ball was starting to pop off the bat, in which case now I'm having to change the style of hitting I do. So that actually moved me from the leadoff hitter to a third position where I'm hitting the ball further into the outfield, and dribbles in the infield that I would beat out, I'm now not able to do because I'm hitting them too hard and they're just throwing me out. And so it's just a really interesting thing that I had. And I guess the key to this is I did a lot of forearm training for baseball my entire life, but it didn't really do anything until I started rock climbing. And all of a sudden, my forearm strength went way up. So if you're looking to rock climb or doing a peak that's going to involve something like that, you're going to have to start like hanging on a door frame. Hang board is the easiest way to do it in a hotel or in something like that. But, other than that, just go to the local climbing gym, which there's climbing gyms kind of everywhere. It's a good fitness, I think.
Yeah. And I think, again, kind of relating back to the listeners, to be clear, to get into mountaineering, you don't necessarily have to get into vertical climbing. So if you listen to this part and you're like, wow, that's not for me, that never will be for me. I know Karsten corroborates this, that, okay, that's cool. You don't ever have to do that. So I think that kind of segues. I had a question I wanted to ask first, but I think this is a good time to then let's segue into next level mountaineering experience that could be done in a day or two domestically. So if somebody's thinking and they're excited about this and they're like, you know what, I want to do this. Where do you think? So here's the caveat. In a previous discussion, you cautioned having this myopic view of, let's say, training for Mount Rainier, for example, and listening to a podcast like this and then saying, all right, now I'm going to go for it. Okay. I know you have concerns with that thought. You can weave that in if you want to make a comment on that, but also, what are the next level? What's the next one? And the next, so not past 3. Let's not go past.
Yeah. Well, I think, so the biggest thing is just when you go into the mountains, the more skill set you have to do the peak that you want to do, and the more you build to that, both fitness and skill set wise, can really set you up for success, and not just success in like a safety realm, but also success in a fun realm, which will lead you to want to do it more, which of course, if you can build a lifestyle around this, shape becomes part of your thing. It's really nice to have something to train for. For me, it is. It gives me motivation to get out of bed. So I think for me, as I guide, I don't like to guide guests and just drag them up mountains. Like, I really like to teach people to become climbers, and whatever that means to them. If they just want to hike up peaks and I say just hike up peaks, I mean, you can hike up some pretty tall peaks in the world that are pretty hard. That's cool. If you want to be on a rope and, climb rock or ice at a really technical level to get to the top of something, or, whatever, then all of a sudden you're going to just need more of a skill set. So how do we build stuff up like that? I guess I would say like cool progressions are things like, gosh, I was picked 3 mountains that are diverse, but yet have objectives. Maybe like, you go climb a Mount Washington in New Hampshire. Not very high altitude. You can start to learn how to be in crampons. Probably do a first day of like ice climbing skills down in the valley, in North Conway. And then you build up to going up and maybe staying in the Harvard cabin. And then you go to the top of Mount Washington via some, either snow route to the top, or you could do a be more technical and do some sort of ice route.
Let me stop you there. Can you take somebody who's never done that before and do some training with them a day or 2 or 3, and then do this ice climbing you're talking about?
Oh,
Or is
well,
that
I mean,
like,
a person in shape, we could do it that day, but it's just,
oh,
is
okay,
it going to be that much fun? I mean, there's a hike up, it's steep and you have to put crampons on and all the,
okay,
there's a lot of things. Yeah, I could prep somebody over the phone to do that. How much fun is that going to be? And at some point, could it be me just dragging them to the top? It
right.
could be. And that's, I don't really enjoy that. I enjoy people to have fun and be part of that. And I think typically people want to prepare for that. And of course, being in shape would be a big part of just that, because it's mostly hiking to the top, right? It's mostly hiking again. There's some sections where you're going to possibly want a rope and be a little technical, but and that's the easiest way to the top. But then there's these more mountaineering style routes that you would want technical expertise to do. So taking a few days on the front end to do something like that, a couple days, then you could probably still do it in a day. You wouldn't have to spend the night, in the Harvard cabin or up there. You could do it all in a day. I mean, people do it all the time. So that could be easily done in a long weekend, and you'd have a great time. With full set, weekend and full skill set and do it. Yep.
Good. Okay, that's my point. You clarified that. So if somebody wanted to do it and they were in good shape, they can meet with you, take a couple days, learn how to do it, and then they can enjoy the experience right away. Now, I don't want you to lose your train of thought. You had like 3 things in mind. You started with Mount Washington and then...
Yeah. So then, maybe the next peak would be like a Mount Baker. Okay. So now Mount Baker. So the difference between Mount Washington and Mount Baker is we got altitude and glaciers. Everybody likes glaciers. It's really cool. It's kind of what delineates big mountains in the world. Not that there's not some big unglaciated peaks, but yeah. So now we go to Mount Baker. That's a 3-day trip. And that's 3 days up and down the mountain. A day hiking in, get to camp. Next day, either skills, or next day climb and back to camp, or summit and back to camp. And then the next day hike out, or, you do a skill day and then you do a summit and out in one day, which is a really big day. And that starts to teach you these glacier style skills. Now, if you do a 3-day, a 4-day deal is better, because that obviously builds an extra day in for those skills. And, you just start to learn crevasse rescue and some of these things like that. More time to relax. And again, if we're just spreading this out, just mileage wise, obviously, if you're going to move 20 miles and you're going to do it in 2 days, well, that's 10 miles a day. Where if you're doing it in 4 days, 5 miles a day. So it's just easier on yourself, carrying a bigger load, right? Anywhere from a, 2 to 3 day trip to a 5 or 6 day trip, depending on the skill set that you're really wanting to learn and accomplish on these. And again, the more time you spend on the front end learning this skill set, like if you did a 4-day trip to Mount Washington, well, maybe now you're ready to do, a 3-day trip to Mount Baker. Versus if you do a 2-day trip on Mount Washington, maybe you need to do a 5-day trip on Mount Baker. Does that make sense? So
yeah, absolutely. So you get to the summit. It's not that it takes that long to get to the summit. You're telling them, hey, spend some time at the base and in the middle or whatever, get some skills, really enjoy it. You're already out here. Let's build this skills base. And then, then we'll go to the top,
Yeah.
So
and that helps with altitude for folks too, because a lot of folks
Sure.
are coming from lower elevations. So
yeah.
Probably biggest big mountain feeling you can get in the United States. It's actually not the tallest, but it's Mount Rainier. Mount Whitney is actually the tallest. It's unglaciated, a little further south, so it doesn't have any glaciers on it. But Mount Rainier is, it's a really big peak. It's a volcano. It's awesome. Like lots of glaciers on there. That's one of those peaks that, depending again on the skill set that you have, you can climb that in 2 days. Depends on how acclimatized you are and, these sorts of things. And so, but that's something that, we could, with the skill sets learned in the previous mountains, that you could get up and down Mount Rainier and have an awesome time. And, and I think building up to that, it's cool. Like if you go to a Mount Washington, lower altitude, you've done some training for 4 to 8 months of training to go do Mount Washington, you're going to have an awesome time there.
To Mount Rainier?
No, to Mount Washington. And I'm just building up to this again. So
okay, got it.
If you where if you're going to go do a Mount Rainier and you do 4 to 8 months of just physical training and then jump into Rainier, you could probably do that and people will do it, but the weather goes bad. You have a little problem with gear. Maybe walking in crampons wasn't as easy as you thought. It just doesn't set you up for success. So probably want to spend longer training for a bigger peak like that than you would, you do like, again, maybe even just 3 months of training for a Mount Washington. Then you go do, a Mount Baker, you spend 4 or 5 months. You now know what that training provided on that smaller peak. I might try this. I might do this a little different.
When you say training, are you talking about physical training, not skills?
Well, yeah. Because, I think, because obviously everybody's different. I've just found this over the years with working with folks. It's like, hey, do this training or whatever. And they get there and like, I wish I'd have done more of this because this feels like it really helped me out. Okay, well, next peak, do more of that. And that's, again, just how we have like building that skill base of like, how do I train? Because I think there's something for folks, even with physical training. It's like, you got to learn how to put that into your daily life. And so once you figure that out, you spent, 4 months doing that. It's like, okay, like this is, and then you see the result. The next time you go do it, you're more willing to put that much time in, and it just becomes less effort because you're like, oh yeah, I know how to get up at, maybe I'm getting up an hour earlier every day to do some walking or whatever. And, I think that just becomes part of the lifestyle and it's just easier. And so you can do bigger and bigger objectives by starting smaller and kind of figuring out what those objectives are. But in the mountains, we just have to realize it's not just shape. It's not like going to run a marathon. It's like there's actually a skill set involved that provides us a level of safety and fun.
Right.
The whole idea is that at some point it's fun, right? It might be type 2 fun, but at least at some point it's fun. So we do want those skills to develop as we get into bigger peaks.
Okay. All right. That makes sense, man. That was killer. I loved it. Great conversation. I think we've accomplished the goal. I think there's enough information here to give people the confidence. Okay. I think hiring people is very helpful. So I'll have you give your coordinates in a second, your social media or your website or whatever. Folks listening, life's too short. If you're excited about this kind of endeavor, reach out to Karsten, learn the skills, get together with him, and crush some of these peaks, man. Even if it takes years, it's just the process and the journey is fun as well. It's not just the actual summit itself. And then, of course, for getting fit, reach out to me, and I could also collaborate with Karsten as well if there's anything in particular that would be better for both hiking, trekking, backpacking expert, meshes with an entire mountaineering expert. There might be some other fitness stuff that needs to be fleshed out. So anyway, all right, share your coordinates and how to get in touch with you, and we're done, man.
Pisgah Climbing School is what I own and operate out of here in Western North Carolina, near Asheville. That's Brevard, a little mountain town outside of Asheville. But yeah, if folks have questions, they can feel free to email at Pisgah Climbing School, just pisgahclimbing.com. I also have an Instagram. Yeah, Pisgah, Pisgah, climbing-school.com. And then, yeah, I'm on Instagram, Karsten Delap, KarstenDelap. Yep, you just look that up. And I answer stuff on there too. I'm on all the rest of the social medias as well. Generally, it's just my first and last name like that. So, but yeah, I think it's great for folks. The mountains have given me a lifestyle that helps me stay motivated to stay in shape. And I think that's one of the greatest things about them is just gives me something to look forward to and a reason to get out of bed every morning and stay in that shape. So, yeah.
There is plenty of research and there's plenty of evidence that people getting out of their comfort zone mentally and physically is living a full life. And I think mountaineering, even hiking, backpacking, trekking, it really helps improve the quality of life for sure. So anyway, all right, my friend, it was good to meet you.
Yeah, great chatting with you. Awesome.
I'll look forward to getting back in touch with you at some point, my friend.
Sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Talk to you soon.
That concludes this episode of the Hike Strong podcast. I'm committed to keeping all of the episodes for free. All I ask is that you subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. And don't forget to share this podcast with your friends. My goal is to build a vast community of hikers with the confidence to crush any local or global trail. I hope you will join me in this endeavor. So until next time, train, hike, repeat. And as always, I'm here to support you every step of the way.